Welcome to the Action Campaign's video series explaining the legislative provisions of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act of 2021, commonly called the AHCIA. In this video, Jennifer and I will discuss a provision in the bill that would expand multifamily bond recycling. Jennifer, before we dive into the bond recycling, can you provide some background on multifamily bonds and the private activity bond volume cap?
I'd be happy to, Ariane. Housing bonds, including both multifamily bonds and single-family mortgage revenue bonds, are what we call private activity bonds, or PABs. There are other bonds that are considered PABs too, like bonds that are used to finance student loans or certain infrastructure projects. There are a few important things to understand about PABs. First, states and local governmental entities sell PABs to investors to finance activities where there is a private owner. So in the example of multifamily housing, there's a private owner of that housing. For mortgage revenue bonds, the private owner is the low or moderate income home buyer getting the mortgage. Second, PABs are tax exempt, which means that when an investor purchases a PAB, the interest on the bond is exempt from federal income tax. Investors are willing to accept a lower rate of return on a PAB than they would if they invested in other investments like taxable bonds because they get that tax exemption with the PAB. And third, states and localities are limited on how much PAB authority they can issue in a given year. The limit for each state is based on how many people live in the state. So if the state decides to use more of its PAB authority to finance a wastewater treatment plant one year, it will have less PAB authority available to finance multifamily housing. This means that when there isn't enough PAB authority to meet all of the state's needs, the different uses are in competition with each other. The amount of PAB authority each state has is called its bond cap or bond volume cap.
That's very helpful background. How much bond cap is used for multifamily housing as opposed to other eligible activities?
In recent years, well more than half of the bond cap used nationwide has gone to multifamily housing bonds, with mortgage revenue bonds the second most common use. Of course, this varies state to state and year to year.
Do states have enough bond cap to meet their housing needs?
That varies from state to state too. But what we've seen is that more and more states are starting to become bond cap constrained. That's what we call it when a state doesn't have enough bond cap.
Okay, so let's talk about the multifamily bond recycling now. What is recycling?
Bond recycling is a way to stretch bond cap so that a state can get more use out of the PAB authority it gets each year if it is cap constrained. As we've discussed in our video on lowering the bond financing threshold, usually states will devote bond cap in the form of multifamily bonds to a project in order to trigger the 4% credits. But then the developer refinances the property with permanent debt when the property is placed in service. Therefore, they pay off the multifamily bonds at that time. So in 2008, Congress authorized multifamily bond recycling. This allows states to use the proceeds from the repayment of multifamily bonds to essentially create new multifamily bonds that don't further reduce the state's bond volume cap. This means they can use these recycled bonds to finance more rental housing.
Interesting. So do the properties financed with the recycled bonds also get 4% credits?
No, they do not. Credits can only be generated from new bond volume cap, not recycled bond cap. It's also a very complicated financing structure with rigid deadlines. Only a few states have taken advantage of bond recycling because of these complexities and the fact that there aren't any 4% credits available to these rental properties.
Can recycled multifamily bonds be used to finance other activities that use bond volume cap?
Not currently. Recycled multifamily bonds can only finance multifamily production without 4% credits.
That's too bad. How would the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act help?
The bill would allow states to use recycled multifamily housing bond proceeds to finance not only new multifamily developments, but also more mortgages for first-time homebuyers through the Mortgage Revenue Bond Program. That means that mortgage revenue bonds and multifamily bonds wouldn't be in competition for the same bond cap. Using multifamily bonds triggers the 4% credit when the bond authority is new authority. But with mortgage revenue bonds, there is no additional resource to be triggered. So it wouldn't matter if the bond cap was new bond cap or proceeds from recycled multifamily bonds.
So this change essentially means there would be more new bond cap available to use for multifamily developments because at least some of the single family first-time home buyer mortgages could be financed with recycled proceeds.
Exactly.
Is there anything else the bill does to make the multifamily bond recycling easier?
Yes, actually. It also provides more flexibility to states by allowing them to have 12 months to issue new loans backed by the recycled proceeds. Right now, they only have 6 months to issue those loans.
That's great, Jennifer. For more on our video series, visit the Action Campaign's website at www.rentalhousingaction.org.